and I think this is important. It's important to highlight the fact that it is not something automatic. It is something that has to be fought for to be won. I think that is one of the shortcomings of what was a great movement, the social forum process called, I mean, another world is possible, but at the time that you had the global economic crisis, we didn't fight for such an alternative world per se. We need to win the argument, and we need to win the political struggle. And that other world that is possible can only be based on public sector led growth and development, government spending, and we've passed through. We have not finished passing through. You still have surges in a few countries of the pandemic, but yeah, we're getting to the twilight of it. But we shouldn't also forget that there are a number of ongoing, you might say, pandemics or emergencies, if you will, like the global climate crisis and environmental emergency, and which can be addressed only with public sector-led solutions, for example, and which is something that the ITF and the PSI, that's the International Transport Workers Federation and Public Services International, have been at the forefront of, public transportation to reduce emissions, reduce reliance on fossil fuels. These are not things that private sector-led growth and development will promote, because for big business, for corporations, it's all about making and expanding profits. It's all about accumulating capital. And as far as they are concerned, the people and the planet come very distant second and third. So what would a public sector future look like? A public sector future would entail adequate spending to ensure universal health care. It would entail adequate spending to ensure that every child, irrespective of the social background she or he comes from, can have access to quality education. Right now, what you have is you have in several countries, particularly in the global south, at best two-tiered social services, health and education. The wealthier people, even when you have social health insurance, there are limits to procedures that are covered from the social insurance, and you have the rich, the 1% to draw from Bernie Sanders, being able to access top-notch healthcare services, both outside the shores of their country and within their country. And the poor, at best, have bad health or worse, and people die. These are not just some abstractions. The fact that you have a today based on the commodification and marketization of everything, including health, results in millions of deaths, from infectious diseases, from non-communicable diseases, and the same with education. You have millions of out-of-school children. Why? Because they come from poor backgrounds, or at best access low-quality education. Unfortunately, and this, we're talking of fighting for a future that is public, we need to have fundamental reforms of the global financial architecture. For example, the international financial institutions and multilateral development banks support what they describe as private first. And that is to say, billions of dollars annually get forked out to corporations, particularly limited to through the IFC, International Financial Corporation of the World Bank, and These are used to further promote commercialization and marketization of social service. And this undermine human rights. This actually run, as the Brazilian Health Forum pointed out in 2017 after, and then congratulations to on the victory of Lula. I think it's a victory for every change-seeking person on this planet. As you might know, in December 2016, the then Temer government passed the constitutional amendment 999 or 95 times 9. And one of what that meant was that expenditure on social services like health and education were frozen for 20 years. For 20 years. This resulted in cuts budgetary allocation by up to 35.7% only the following year. And the Brazilian Health Forum pointed out that, look, this is not only limited to Brazil. I use that as an example. This is in contravention of conventions that governments ratify, including the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. They go against even the provisions enshrined in the constitutions of countries. Over 120 countries in the world have the right to health stated in their constitutions. But more often than not, you also have caveats, about this being more of objectives than things that are justiciable that you can take the government to court on. So public future will ensure that governments are held to account for implementation of universal access to quality public services. It will entail also, and there's an element of a future that is public that is often overlooked, and that is participatory involvement of people at the grassroots. A future that is public is not just about a few bureaucrats running the lives of the people for them. No, rather it is about the active involvement of people in right from the municipal and local governments levels, to the national and indeed global level through regular consultations, and not just consultations or limiting our voices to every 4 years or 5 years of votes, but on continuous basis in shaping things to be done. So for us as PSI and as most in the trade union movement, we do realize that workers and trade unions have a key role to play in the fight for a future that is public. And this is not only public sector unions. All unions have roles to play in this, and we cannot win this alone. We need to build alliances and coalitions with civil society organizations, also challenging the commodification and marketization of life itself and all that makes life beautiful, including social services and cultural. So and also very importantly with the communities, because part of what is done by because neoliberalism is essentially ideologically driven. The evidence shows, as I pointed out, not just the evidence has repeatedly shown, that private sector-led growth and development do not work. We're not saying proscribe the private sector, no, but we're saying that the fundamental things that make us a society have to be in public hands, and that is why people like Margaret Thatcher, to push through the origins of the neoliberal project, argue that there's no such thing as community. So One of the things that neoliberal ideologues do within and outside government is to try to give a dog a bad name to hang it. In a lot of our countries, you could hear arguments about, poor service delivery by the public sector workers and things like that. But what is not put in perspective is that where these happen, these are often as a result of gross underfunding of public services. We have seen massive underinvestment in social services, particularly over the last decade. And one of the things, the more resilient health systems have been health systems that are rooted in universal public health, that are rooted in universal public health care and with adequate government spending for this. The WHO confirmed as much when you look at, I'll give an example. The impact of COVID-19 on Italy, has been well documented. In fact, it was in the wake of the surge there that there was the conclusion that this could be considered a pandemic. But one of the things we need to point out there is that Lombardy, where this was, which was the epicenter, is one of the richest parts of Italy. But it is where you have had the furthest privatization and regionalization of health services. And it proved far less resilient.
You have 2 minutes. Please wrap up if you can. Thank you.
Okay. I will. Thank you very much. So essentially, and this will be my final point. We need universal quality public services for not just economic development, including economic development, but as well for social, cultural, and spiritual development. And also to save someone said that we don't even talk of the earth destroying, but the life on earth, to avoid the catastrophic sword of Damocles that hangs on humankind and all life on earth as a result of for profit interest. We need we need universal quality public services and private sector led solutions, fiscal consolidation, austerity measures have been at best false gods, including public-private, so-called public-private partnerships, which are essentially subsidization of corporations with government money that could be used rather to improve on provision of public services. We should rather push for things like public partnerships, international global solidarity that is based on our values of solidarity and humanity. So the future is public, yes, but it will not just happen. The forces arrayed against it happening are strong and rich, and they are getting wealthier on the backs and blood of the masses, of billions of people. You have over 30 billion new, not just new, that became billionaires as a result of the COVID, even whilst billions have their situations of life worsened. So they are rich, they are powerful, but they are few and we are many. And we have to fight for that future that is public, and the fight has to start now for a post-COVID world that could be better than what the world has thus been, as a market for the exploitation of the many, the worsening of the living standards of the many, to the benefit of a few and their corporations. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Baba, for those very strong points. I think one of the most important insights that we got from the presentation was that the view of governments and international financial institutions on public services operates on something like a pendulum. When there is crisis, they suddenly affirm that the government's role in providing public services is important. But once you reach the tail end of the crisis, it seems that suddenly fiscal discipline and austerity are the policies of the day. So as Baba said, it will really take all of us, the forces of the trade unions and the popular movements, to reassert that in our day-to-day lives, it is necessary and urgent for governments to step in and provide these public services. So thank you again, Baba, for joining us, and I hope you can stay with us until the discussion at the later end of the session. And now, I'd like to welcome Edlira. Please, you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
I would like to actually pick up just where Baba left on the importance of actually reclaiming public services in a way, and perhaps just as importantly, thinking about how to transform public services and work in the public sector. So I'll have a rather short presentation, I hope, which really draws up on some of the research I've been doing on public partnerships that Baba mentioned, but also in some of the work that we are starting in the online academy, and it's really about a call for action. So just very briefly, the research that I've done, it kind of follows up in the research that the GLU alumni have been doing about 10 years ago, a bit more than 10 years ago now, on alternatives beyond capitalism, where Baba was also a part of the research. And after that, I embarked on a similar research project, which was about finding spaces and forms of resistance that kind of inform the transformation of public services and work, and as well as visions and pathways to those transformations. Bernard, can I have next, please? And the idea has been really looking and analyzing ongoing resistance and strategies to kind of see how they can actually inform this redefinition of the vision. And this different strategies that I was able to actually research on kind of provide important insights on how in mobilizing for better public services, the different workers and communities have been both trying to overcome commercialization, commodification, and privatization of public services. You know, as we know, the private operators actually benefiting on the back of access to public services, quality of public services, working conditions of workers, and so on, but also trying to overcome really the limitations of the state-owned public service utilities. And that's an important discussion to be had in terms of the fact that indeed public services can at times be bureaucratic, hierarchical, and really hardly designed to realize their creativity of labor during the labor process. And at times, and I come from that part of the world where, you know, they can be really inefficient, exclusive, and even corrupted. And I think that's something that we should be mindful of in defending public services. It's not just about defending state-owned public services, but it's really about transforming these services in a way, bringing the public back into the public services and expanding the publicness of public services. Bernard, can I have next, please? And that's the kind of concept that I've been trying to assess the different experiments happening, is the publicness framework, which is really a multidimensional concept, you know, which has the aim of transforming the services and going, as I said, beyond the state ownership or management of public services. And that would really mean taking pride in one's work, and that would be for workers, valuing staff, and that's for management and users, transparency and accountability as really important components of the publicness framework, and community participation. But it's also about redefining work and transforming work in the public sector, and where, you know, and that transformation would need to be underpinned by values of public ethos and a commitment to actually serve the population. In this way, work actually in the public sector must have an intrinsic meaning. It has to be oriented towards servicing people and responsive and accountable to communities, and overcoming these bureaucratic and technocratic tendencies of public organization. And with the publicness, so there is also an effort to actually kind of operationalize the concept, because different concepts are emerging when we talk about public sector, and that would be, for instance, the commons, publicness, and so on. And it's very important that we kind of find indicators that would kind of capture a new concept, which would then become important as a screening tools, really, against which to evaluate different forms of resistance and alternatives that are emerging. So, and at the same time, these indicators are kind of the polar opposites of what's gone wrong with the privatization of public services. And the key indicators that are identified by the literature are equity, participation, efficiency, quality of services, accountability, transparency, quality of the workplace, solidarity, and public ethos. And all this are really meant to provide us some sort of a guidance in terms of identifying those different forms of resistance that are not just about little improvements within the system, but really kind of set in motion certain transformative changes that can actually can lead to more radical transformation of public services. And the last, so it is with this understanding that, together with Baba, but also people from other global trade unions, such as Education International, International Transport Workers Federation, and others, we are working actually to create a massive open online course, The Future is Public. And in this regard, this is actually an open call to all of you, if you would like, or if any of you would like to actually join in some form of a research project in which you could perhaps identify cases, ongoing struggles in your own organizations and communities that meets our indicators of what would be, a transformative struggle. And it's basically about struggles where we can identify these different indicators of publicness that I just mentioned. Of course, if there is interest, we can discuss it later on, but I think for the moment, I would really want to just keep it to this point in terms of emphasizing the importance of strengthening and expanding public services, not just to prepare us for crisis and to make us more resilient, but also to address really fundamental challenges facing the world today. And that would be, of course, environmental crisis, but also increasing inequality. And there is already solid research of how important public services are to actually challenge, to actually address these different challenges. So I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully we have a bit of time for discussion if you are interested to actually be part of the case studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Adlira, for that very wonderful and concise presentation. What I really appreciated was that this notion of transforming services so that we could bring back the public and strengthen it even, and that workers are at the core of it. Not only is their welfare integrated in that framework, but also their voice and their agency, which I think is very important in our work moving forward. So thank you again, and perhaps we can move on to our final speaker for the day, Syed Usman. You have 10 minutes.
for giving me this opportunity to present the issues on future is public the spending public services in a post-pandemic world.
Okay, I think he has a PowerPoint presentation, if it could be loaded. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Actually, if I am not wrong, that as per Asian Development Bank, that they said that the countries of Southeast Asia operate with relatively small short notice, on an average 50% employment in the public service is the fact. And while we are talking about this, that during this pandemic and the post-pandemic situation, what's the role about the state and what types of initiative they have taken and what they are need to be done in future. So the COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of the state to respond to the crisis, and only the government can step in on the short notice to mobilize and distribute the large amount of resources to respond urgent needs the population. It's the reality, and I will talk about it in context of Bangladesh, because public sectors has a lot of development and there is still needed a lot of activities. I will try to highlight some issues which will be help to all of us that to inside of the public services and sectors initiatives. So when we will go for the contribution, the total employment 16.8 million in Bangladesh currently. If says, then the 3.8% employment is public sector only, where the 58.5% employment in private sector. That means the public service in Bangladesh are the service provided by the government to the community, and which services they actually they provided. They basically they of course the electricity, the gas and petroleum, other the water and telecommunication, and something else, a lot of things as well. About the services of the Bangladesh context, of course the 1971 actually recognition as an independent and sovereign state of Bangladesh. Before that, and the 1972 actually the Public Service Commission formed, and the nationalism policy come forward on state-owned enterprise. Before the 1971, the state-owned enterprise was very much short. It's maybe the 30%, but in 1972, it's come forward on a minimum of 90%, which is covered on the state-owned enterprise. It was the decision by the government. And 1974, 305 state-owned enterprise, including the industries, bank and financial institutions, are covered in this part. Whether the 1982, the new industrial policy and industrialization come forward, which already mentioned Sister Idler and Baba, that the modernization and the marketing and the globalization hit on the 1982 in Bangladesh. In present situation, actually the both public and private working separately as well as the together. But the result is private sector is dominating because it's a large, and contributing the factors is globalization and free market economy. The result is profit, profit and profit. It is the reality. Then if I want to say some state-owned enterprise in Bangladesh, then the role of state-owned enterprise is enterprise with establishment by the government, and it actually the government authority also regulated this type of state-owned enterprise, and actually it's the core actions is to promote the public services and interest and engagement with the commercial activities. And recently the 49 state-owned enterprises there, and which is the related on the characteristics service sector, most leading the 19. Then on the transport and communication, industry, power, gas and water, construction, agriculture and fisheries, and trade as well. The generating revenue, if we just see the statistic, then Bangladesh Economic Review 2021, they showed that 2016 to 2022, 2020, that means 5.11% are average the increasing rate, the generating revenue. But profit is declining in this side. The ground, if you count in the state-owned enterprise, their actions in terms of the opportunity for the employment, the ratio is fiscal year 2018 to 19. Perhaps the 2019 and 20 is increasing, but due to pandemic, it was declined. And the consolidated economic analysis also showed the report that the from these 49 organizations, that the profit gained 37, loss was 11, and neutral position is 1. Why loss? If you want to see this, the ground of this loss, the electricity problem, increase of huge purchasing, mismanagement, limited working capital, modernization, expansion capable of senior management, high quality materials as well. But it's still why we want to such kind of services for the peoples. That's meant government and promotion of the governance. And it's the ultimate result is goods and services for the welfare state. Now, I just want to go in the part of the during pandemic. An example, who is already mentioned this, Brother Baba in his presentation, that there are a lot of enough role of public and private sectors in during this pandemic, especially to connect the health sector. In Bangladesh, we found that in when the wave is first come, then the private hospital, they don't take any types of initiatives. Particularly, their role was very much less rather than to the public sectors. And the peoples of Bangladesh, they are not able to go in the private hospital to seek some support or seek the little bit different types of health services from this side, and sometimes they are not carry out the treatment facilities from the private sector. Then this cost was very much high, and it wasn't possible for the at most those who are the rural peoples and those who are the working peoples or the poor peoples in Bangladesh. Then the role was the COVID-19 pandemic, the hospital treatment come forward in the public sectors, and actually they took the lead in the health sector, and you will get the result, and that means the vaccination program of Bangladesh. That means the targeted population was 70%, which is almost covered from the Bangladesh government. First dose completed in 79.85%, and second dose is 72.81%, and third dose against the nearly 46.49%. And it's our achievement from the public sector. That means the Bangladesh fifth in the world in COVID recovery index, top in South Asia. It's the result of the public sector index. If I just look after the challenges and the crisis and COVID-19 pandemic, actually all of you know that during the pandemic, the situation was the dramatic loss of human life worldwide, and the present the unprecedented challenges to public health, food system, and the world of work. And if we see the post-pandemic situation, of course, still we are thinking about this, that the poverty, psychosocial situation is, of course, it's not good. Education system fall down because during this pandemic, it was already almost a lockdown, and it stopped down all of institutions. Unemployment, traditional sectors is lost, telling the world business policy, inflation rate is day by day, it is increasing, livelihood is almost the declining the foreign aid right now, and the newly emerged the job market as well. Reinforcement of the development and new normal in state-owned enterprise and other sectors as well. And if we look after the adaptation of digital platform and world of work, of course, the COVID shows that how much need to the mitigate the challenges and whether the such kind of technology can support us. Then the initiative of the public sectors during this pandemic, it was divided in the immediate significant measures and incentives and announcements from the government. So I just want to show this key point because the time is very much short, I think. In the immediate significant measurement, the government taken the national COVID-19 responses and the closure of the official government private officials and education institution in the country was stopped the prohibition of public gathering and transportation services as well. Government cancellation of the 15th Independence Day celebration event, because you know that our historically we are another 50 years of Bangladesh, our independence. During that time it was stopped by the government because it was the focus on the public health issues and the restriction to celebrate all festivals during the pandemic. And the incentives announcement, of course, government has providing a lot of packages for the private sector as well, for their flourishment, for their establishment and employment. And if we see for the banking sector, small corporates and medium-sized enterprise, for expansion of the export development, for the agriculture sector, for doctor, physician, nurses, and the healthcare, as well as for social program safety net. It was covering in this time, and the post-COVID and the war crisis of Russia and Ukraine. Here I saw the priorities in the post-COVID-19 area. That's the creation of the employment. It is very much important. Loan support for the small enterprise business, vaccine for the adult and children, rescue of the rural development and localization, extended the health support, loan support for returning migrant workers. And our government has taken these initiatives with a view to effectively address the negative economic and social impact of COVID-19 and a huge amount allocation for the health sector particularly. And this increase the safety net program and the ultimate aims to normal and promotion of the 8-5 years plan and reach the SDGs goal. And I'm going to hear this information that the war and pandemic could negatively impact Bangladesh balance of payment. It is a statement of our Prime Minister that when war and after this pandemic, the situation is really the worst, and what is going on, we don't know. And in this situation, continued the high inflation, increased people in misery. A lot of newspaper discovering this information. In this time, TCB is called the Trade Corporation, resumed the track scale for the low-income people in Bangladesh. They targeted the 1 crore peoples. And TCB began selling essential items for the 1 crore families. Fuel price increasing, but still hope that the no hike in electricity price now. It's called by the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Corporation, and challenges of the public sectors that I've already mentioned, Sister Iglera, that which is already covered in here. The budget is less as per the required demand from services. People demands and expectation is high, but the resources less. Political influence, biasness is recruitment the process, lack of innovation and intelligence adapting the technology, bureaucracy even is the providing services to the public, lack of accountability, ignorance in implication, the laws of public regulations and sometimes, and dual ownership of the management. Formation of union and the unionized is probably is sometimes prohibited from the public sector, so it is most more the challenging which we wrote. That's the one thing, the PPP, as all of you know that the context, and it is, of course, in Bangladesh, of course, we are giving the priority to reach the SDG goal and our development. But in such a word, that means I just against the rapid development. If we want to see the inclusive development and the development for the all peoples, then of course, we should move forward, and which we have already learned from the COVID-19 that essential services and their workers are truly the foundation of the health society, so that at the privatization and austerity have failed, we must reclaim, build and invest in democratic public service for a sustainable recovery towards post-pandemic and the world of work. The future is public. And some of the recommendation is, I have tried to written in here, that for balanced and healthy society, public sector is best. Policy formulation and implementation to ensure welfare of the people and private public initiatives, best practices and lessons learned from the neighbors countries need to be taken, and strategic management of proper monitoring and accountability, new technology and knowledge orientation operated needs to be addressed, engagement of peoples in ensuring quality services, commitment and responsibility from all parties for these sectors, of course need to be more focused on good governance and more work for promoting human rights, labor rights and the environmental standards among the creation of mass opportunity for formation of union, and last, the all stakeholder active participation on the process and due respect their opinion, suggestion for strengthening the public sectors as well as the services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sayed Usman. As you mentioned, right, we see that during the pandemic, profit-driven business models of healthcare delivery has impeded the access of many people to these urgent services. And this is why we need to really pay attention to the challenges and address them directly. And this goes full circle to what Baba was saying earlier about the need to reclaim the public sector as an immediate agenda for the trade union movement and for every one of us. So now I think we have a bit of time for questions and discussion. So Baba is still with us on Zoom if we have not lost the connection. So for now, I will be collecting some questions and then our speakers can respond afterwards. So could you please raise your hand if you have any questions or inputs? Yes. The mic, please, if you could pass it. It's here.
Thank you very much, Sister Elira, Brother Mithu, and of course our moderator. Actually, I'd like to add something with Brother Mithu about the public services offered in Bangladesh. Basically, the state offers some basic necessities. For example, it offers free education up to secondary level, and the tertiary level education is also very cheaper in comparison to private sector. There is also cheaper health service in comparison to private sector. And recently the government started providing sheltering service to the homeless and the landless. And there is also more than 100 social safety net programs. And sometimes government also subsidize in agriculture related production and manufacturing production. Despite having a lot of public services, actually where we are in concern that the proper distribution and access to these services and about the quality of the services. Having such a wide range of opportunities, people are looking for private services because of this quality. So our concern is into the improvement of quality public services, not only the public services. And if I particularly mention about the state response towards COVID-19, the government announces stimulus package around 8 billion, almost 600 million US dollar only for the RMG sectors to pay the salaries of the workers and to continue their business smoothly. But the reality is that there are many ready-made garment sector workers who didn't paid fully, and they also had to face a salary cut. On the other hand, the government also announced another cash assistance around 9 million US dollar for informal sectors workers, and they also provide health insurance for the public service, though it's not continued up to the end. But the informal sector workers have limited access to these cash services. So our main concern is that the mechanism, how we access to these public services, we need to consider, and we need to develop strategies for fair distribution, which will be free of nepotism and without any prejudice in any context. So I think not only expanding the public services, we should move for ensuring the quality public services and services for the right person. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other responses from the floor? Yes.
I'd like to address this question to Elira. It's about the public-public partnership as opposed to public-private partnership. First is, how can PUPs, public-public partnerships, or PUPPS, address, the concept of publicness? And secondly, can you provide us, an example of a public-public partnership that worked already or is there's some level of success in it, and what could account for the success of that initiative? Just one example, Edlira. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other questions or responses? All right. Could you kindly flash it, perhaps? Yes, please. Hold on. Yeah, so you can read it, Verna, if it's possible.
So I'll read it. It's from our participant from Bangladesh, Rizu Naul. Great presentation, thanks. As we can see, the victim of any past, present, and future challenge has always been the marginalized people, the working class. Trade unions have well contributed during the pandemic. Now it is time to engage themselves in policy dialogues and represent voice of workers in bipartite and tripartite forums for sustainable national recovery through public initiatives.
Yes, go ahead. Thank
Yes,
you. Thank you to our participant online. And there's another question here. Yes.
Especially, I don't have a special question for the panel. Thank you for your nice presentations. We have got many lessons from your side. I'll put my some realizations about the public sectors. We all know that every incident give us some lessons. Like pandemic also gave us great lessons. I mean that when the pandemic occurring in Nepal and all over the world, there were all private sectors were totally closed here now. We could not seen in the surface. So public sector in Nepal, especially like telecom, electricity corporations, water resource corporations, even government bank, they were given the service throughout the day and night. So people at that time, even government also realized that how public utilities and institutions are the important than private sectors. Even we can see on the TV and news with the BBC and Indian channel that in India there were our government postal service had been delivering the necessary stuffs to the needy peoples there. So I would suggest to our trade union leaders and the trade union organizations that this is the right time to push our effort to promote our public sectors. So this is the right time, because all are realized that public sector is the more important and good than the private sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So perhaps we can.
Final
Yes.
question from
Please,
me.
Verna.
Very small. Anybody can comment. So for example, there's a lot of discussion on the public must be expanded or more strengthened. However, like in the discussion in the first session, but it also means the expansion of the state. Because if we go for really on the public, and the experiences that have been presented in the earlier sessions is that some states are now in debt just to address the impact of the pandemic. So how do you see this? Although Edlira had tackled that there were misconceptions, like the normal misconceptions that when it is public and governed by the state, it is not efficient or inefficient. So that's why there was a move from the World Bank, like Baba has said, in providing debt, but with conditions that they have to privatize public services. So those are some of the issues that also came up. And in relation to Edlira's call about the struggles or whatever, one case in Philippines, the public sector unions there during the pandemic really raised a lot of noise to struggle, because during the pandemic, the front line was not anymore in the hospitals. So because the public health system couldn't take it anymore in the Philippines, so the method of addressing the infections was, first, you address it at home, but at the next level is the village level. So they were using village level healthcare workers. They were called barangay healthcare workers. But these barangay healthcare workers are not considered workers. They were volunteers. But the doctors, I've talked to some of my doctor friends in the hospitals, they relied so much in terms of information and first care from these village healthcare workers. So the public sector workers were taking this issue as their issue to make the village level healthcare workers be recognized as workers during the pandemic, and they were essential workers because they were working in the front lines and they had risk. But the real sad story was that these workers, they were volunteers, they were not given a salary, they were just given a little bit of allowance. They didn't have any transportation allowance. So it was just their way of contributing to the community in crises. And majority of these village level healthcare workers are women. So those are some of the cases that we've come across during the pandemic. Another message online, so I'll become another DJ.
Yes.
So great event and thumbs up to GLU. Me also from Bangladesh, and completely agree with the presenters that future is public. Government should focus on the monitoring and accountability of the government officials as well as the services. That's how the future would be sustainable and successful, led by public sector, as that is now we are missing to compete the private.
Right, thank you, Verna. Okay, so perhaps we can ask our speakers to respond, and then we can see if there's time for another round. Perhaps we can ask Syed Usman to respond first on the inputs regarding Bangladesh from the floor.
Last point,
No, not the last one. Like all the points that were raised.
well, actually, yeah,
We can use this.
yeah, I completely agree with their statement, because still need to be a lot of work from the government, because in 1975, Bangladesh poverty rate was 83 or 84%. But before the pandemic, the rate is now 20 point something, maybe. So that's means we are improving. So such kind of initiatives, of course, they are role of the government, which need to be taken more and more. And of course, our trade unions should come forward towards to think about this pandemic situation, that we have learned more from this pandemic, that what types of initiatives they can do. And Sister Ilana mentioned that the accountability, Brother Arong also mentioned that the transparency and the not the bias, it is very much important in Bangladesh, because particularly in public sectors, sometimes these are very much biased, and some information which is coming in the newspaper, which is not too good for all, because we want to establish a healthy environment where all community peoples can participate. So need to be dialogue, and need to be the close interaction with the multi-stakeholders, those who are very much closest to this sector, and they can take the initiatives for the future is public.
Yes, thank you for that. Perhaps we can ask Baba to respond to some of the points that were raised by Verna regarding the financing, about the problems of debt accumulation perhaps, or how do we get the resources for sustaining this future is public.
Thank you very much. First, there's one thing in what Verna said that I would also want to quickly respond to. The community health workers are not volunteers. They are described as volunteers to further their exploitation. PSI is organizing a project to formalize the work of community health workers in Pakistan, India, and Nepal. Incidentally, we held a conference for this in Kathmandu 2 weeks back, which I should have attended, but it clashed with an earlier fixed event. And we have been able to win in Pakistan. The Supreme Court has recognized that, one, they must be paid not stipends, but at the very least, the national minimum wage. And the lady health workers in Pakistan, they fought a long-drawn battle with the support of PSI, which also resulted in their association being recognized as a trade union, and they have been able to carry out collective bargaining to get more than that national minimum wage. We have also made success in India, particularly in Mumbai, and in Nepal. Nepal is where we are facing the most uphill task, and that's one of the reasons why that conference was put there. They are not volunteers. It's part of the exploitation a lot of them work 40 hours a day, a week. So now about how do we get the funds? The problem with the world is not lack of resources. It is that a few people are getting richer. Last year alone, you had over 2,700 billionaires. And during the COVID pandemic alone, you had, in 2020, you had over 30 new billionaires. The collective wealth of these people is 13.1 trillion US dollars. Meanwhile, the global health spending, which is 10% of global GDP, was 8.3 trillion US dollars. That's like $5 trillion, over $5 trillion less than what some 2,700 people own. Meanwhile, it's amongst the ranks of these same billionaires that you have tax avoidance and their monies kept in tax havens. Every second, the equivalent of the salary of a nurse, a senior nurse, is lost to tax avoidance. Every year, over 437 billion US dollars get lost to tax avoidance. The rich don't pay their fair share. So it's not so much lack of money, but rather, and I'll try to stop here. What we need is fundamental restructuring of the global financial architecture and policy framework. One of the things, I'm happy one of the persons that contributed pointed out how, I think it was Adlira, Adlira and also someone was speaking that, you know, during the pandemic, they had to turn to public. And it was not only about funding, which is very important itself, because public funding is essential to deliver social services. But even in terms of delivery, in Spain requisitioned hospitals, all the private hospitals in that country, for them to be able to address the response. In at least 7 states in India, hospitals were also requisitioned. A number of manufacturing firms were repurposed. That is to say, needs were put before the greed of a few people. At the beginning of the 1970s, the Global South, then as the non-aligned movement, called for a new international economic order. The United Nations passed a resolution in 1974 supporting this. All these were jettisoned by the powerful countries acting in the interest of the handful of rich people and corporations. For us to bring about a better world, for us to win the public future that is required to save humankind and life on earth, we need fundamental restructure. We need what in the spirit of the new international economic order for the current times we are in, I would say a new international global economic and environmental order with the public sector at its heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Baba. Very excellent points. And if I may add very briefly, I think there's an emerging set of ideas in Africa and Latin America that's also worth exploring in Asia. The concept of monetary sovereignty, or governments reclaiming the power over their financial systems away from the influence and the control of international financial institutions. So this is a way of operationalizing what Baba was mentioning about the systemic restructuring of our financial architecture on the global and the national levels. So now I'll give the floor to Adira for her response.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions, Melissa. I think that on the first one, I think it's really important to make that distinction in between public partnerships, PUPs, and public-private partnerships. We don't need more experiments with PPPs, with the public-private partnerships. There is solid evidence that they're a disaster for public budgets, for the quality of services that they don't provide, for what it does to working conditions, and so on. So any sorts of propaganda of how these PPPs are going to support public services should be already denounced and not accepted, because it has been a disaster in developed countries, be that UK, Canada, Australia, and in much of the developed world. You can imagine how it is actually for public services in our countries that enter into these contracts with corporate lawyers about public services that lock public services forever with high penalties in very, very devastating arrangements. So I think that has to be very clear, that what trade unions are demanding is public-public partnerships, and that is partnerships in between the services, public services and workers, and the communities and other social movements in actually transforming public services. So thank you for bringing that up. And the kind of examples of these public-public partnerships are really various. We have lots of initiatives of remunicipalization, basically bringing public services back in-house. And in that process, it's not just about against privatization. It's actually about starting thinking big of how do we transform public services in a way that there is no backslide when there is another government coming in, which may favor again PPPs and so on. And that's, I think, one of the, if we go to the kind of conditions that you said, Melissa, that are important for these partnerships. We've seen, particularly in Latin America, there's been I think perhaps a decade or more or so ago, there was really an expansion of this different forms of partnerships, of trade unions coming together with communities to fight privatization, but on the way, think about transforming public services. Because as I mentioned earlier, these are countries that have had the experience of bureaucratic, exclusive public services, nepotism that you mentioned, all the different problems, and the public services being used as the house where political parties put their militants in. I mean, that's the case in my own country too. So that kind of challenging the whole logic of how public sector has been used by the state, by the political parties in power, to actually accommodate people that serve their interests, and entering into that process of transformation becomes really important and one key factor in the success of such partnerships. And as I mentioned, there's been lots going on in Latin America, very impressive examples in Uruguay of people coming together to fight the privatization of the water services, and in the process creating horizontal alliances within and across borders actually, and trying to build the capacities of the public sector. I think one of the main problems that we have faced in the public sector is that there's 4 decades now of new public public management have brought us in a situation where often the expertise for public sector is being outsourced to our external experts. So the whole knowledge that public sector used to have, you know, of how do you actually build responsive public services has been really moved away to external experts who are paid extremely handsome fees. And meanwhile, they tell us there is not enough money for the public sector. So kind of having that knowledge being brought back and having this open conversation with communities on how do we want to transform public services? How do we want them to be shaped in the particular context of Albania, my own country, or Pakistan, or Nepal, or other countries in Latin America? And that's the conversation we need to be having. And that's what's perhaps the key ingredient of success of these initiatives. It's very hard, but nobody said that transforming the system was going to be easy. It would really require continuous engagement, continuous strategizing of thinking, how do we actually overcome the powers that are there? Because for sure, as Baba mentioned at the beginning, they really come together. And it becomes a question, how do we come together? And understanding that workers are not just workers. Workers are members of communities. And that understanding needs to be really embedded in the strategies that are being used, because workers are often being framed as only their identity as wage earners, but they are also service receivers outside of their workplace, and kind of thinking all the time of workers as member of communities actually become really important. So I would say the cases really vary, but having that going beyond the immediate threat, being that of privatization or layoffs or so on, and go beyond that to say, how do we want to imagine and build those alliances that Baba spoke also, have people on our side. If you have a strike of the public sector, it's going to affect especially the poor, especially the working class people. And they won't be happy if you go on strike because you want higher wages. Alternative ways of industrial action have to be found for the public sector. One could imagine, and I think that was some examples that our comrades in Canada were bringing, that there is a refusal of public sector workers in the transport sector, for instance, to collect fees. So instead of going on strike, you say, you can travel for free. Or in the public health, instead of going on strike and taking doctors and nurses out of services, from services that are already starved from resources, you can say, we bring in nurses and doctors that have retired, and we tell people, we show people, how is it to have fully funded, but also fully staffed public services? How is it that people, workers, nurses, and doctors have time to stop to the patients and ask them how they're doing, how they are feeling, speak to the family members, and so on? So it would require really a rethinking of how do we build strategies, what does it mean collective action in the public sector, and most fundamentally, understanding that the link to the communities and to people, and that public ethos that I mentioned earlier, this is about serving people. It's not that the public should be at our whims, but we are here as public sector workers to serve people, and that commitment becomes really important. And I think trade unions have a lot of work to do in that direction, but there is really no shortcut to this one. So there is only one way forward, and that is rethinking our strategies and really going beyond immediate threats for more transformative changes in public services.
Thank you, Adlira. And as Adlira mentioned, right, the examples you gave, they really present us an important insight on how to move forward in this fight. It's that the popular and public participation in the governance and control of the public sector also triggers a virtuous cycle, because once these people have ownership over these agencies, these services, now they can defend the publicness of these services against even new political parties that come in that might want to reverse the gains that were made by the people. So I think this is one fight that we must continue and strengthen moving forward, together with our communities, together with the people who are benefiting from and are affected by the changes in the public sector. So I look forward also to hopefully many of our alumni here can be part of the initiative that Adlira has mentioned earlier about case studies. Perhaps we can speak more about how we in Asia have tried and have perhaps worked through these challenges to make the public sector a agenda as well as a urgent concern for the trade unions in our work. So thank you so much. I think we have, it's currently 3:14, so unless there are urgent interventions, I believe we can thank all our panelists. Thank you, Baba. Thank you, Syed Usman. Thank you, Adira, for the very wonderful presentations and also the insights from our participants. So that ends our 6th session. Thanks, Baba.
Oh, thank you.
International, Baba.
Thank
Madla.
you. Viva GLU, viva! We should end with a chant, right? Viva GLU, viva!